My maid of honor, my best friend of 20 years, used her wedding speech to humiliate me in front of 200 guests. She thought it was the perfect crime. A joke I'd be forced to accept with a smile. She just didn't know my videographer was my cousin, who had already recorded her confession to take me down a peg, and I was about to make her wish she'd never picked up that microphone. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The clinking of a fork against a champagne flute sliced through the warm, joyful buzz of the reception hall. 200 pairs of eyes turned towards the head table. My heart swelled. This was it. The perfect day I had meticulously planned for over a year, a day built on love, laughter, and the soft glow of fairy lights. I sat beside my new husband, Mark, his hand resting warmly on my thigh. His presence was a solid, reassuring anchor in a sea of overwhelming happiness. And now, the DJ's voice boomed. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce the maid of honor, Olivia's best friend since childhood, Sophie, for a toast to the happy couple. A wave of applause rippled through the room. I beamed, catching Sophie's eye as she rose from her seat. She looked stunning in the emerald green dress we'd picked out together, her blonde hair swept into an elegant updo. She gave me a brilliant, camera-ready smile, and I felt a fresh wave of gratitude. Sophie had been my rock through everything. From scraped knees in kindergarten to navigating the complex blueprints of our respective careers, she was the one constant in my life besides my family. She glided to the microphone stand, her movements practiced and poised, a product of her relentless efforts to build a brand as a social media influencer. She exuded a confidence I had always admired, and sometimes, if I was being honest with myself, envied. "Wow, look at this incredible crowd," she began, her voice smooth and charming. "For those of you who don't know me, I'm Sophie, and I've had the privilege of being Olivia's best friend for, well, longer than either of us would care to admit." Laughter filled the room. Mark squeezed my hand, and I leaned my head on his shoulder for a moment, soaking it all in. My parents were beaming from a nearby table. Mark's family, who had welcomed me with such open arms, were watching her with warm smiles. Everything was perfect. "I've seen Olivia through every phase," Sophie continued. "The awkward middle school phase, the dramatic high school phase, the I'm going to be an architect and build buildings that touch the sky phase, which, to her credit, she actually did." More polite laughter. I smiled, feeling a familiar warmth spread through my chest. This was the Sophie I knew and loved. She then turned her gaze directly to me. Her smile was still in place, but something in her eyes shifted. It was a glint, a flicker of something sharp and cold that I had never seen before. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, so fast that I thought I must have imagined it. "Being her best friend means I know everything about her," Sophie said, her tone taking on a conspiratorial edge. "The good, the bad, and the truly, deeply, mortifyingly embarrassing." A nervous titter went through the crowd. I felt a small, cold knot begin to form in my stomach. Mark's hand tightened on mine. I kept the smile plastered on my face, a bride's mandatory, unassailable mask of joy. Where was she going with this? "I remember one time, back in 10th grade," she said, leaning into the microphone as if sharing a delicious secret. "Olivia had the biggest crush on the senior quarterback, Chad Miller. We all did, but Olivia, she was on another level. She wrote him an entire book of poetry." The knot in my stomach tightened into a cold, hard stone. My breath hitched. No, she wouldn't. We had made a pact, a solemn, pinky-sworn promise 2 decades ago to bury that story forever. It was a moment of such profound teenage humiliation that even now, at 28, the memory made my cheeks burn. "She was so nervous to give it to him," Sophie's voice boomed, each word a physical blow. "So, she decided the best way to do it was to sneak it into his locker. But she got the locker number wrong." The air in the room grew thick and still. The polite smiles on the guests' faces began to freeze. I could feel my own smile becoming brittle. I stared at Sophie, trying to catch her eye, trying to send a silent, desperate plea. "Stop. "Please, Sophie, stop," but she wouldn't look at me. She was playing to the crowd, her face animated, her hands gesturing dramatically. She put her heart-wrenching, tear-stained book of poetry into the locker of Mr. Henderson, the ancient, balding history teacher. A few scattered, uncomfortable chuckles broke the silence, but mostly, why, there was just a vast, echoing quiet. I could feel the blood draining from my face. "And Mr. Henderson," Sophie went on, her voice reaching a crescendo, thought it was a cry for help. He read one of the poems, a real masterpiece titled, "Your eyes are like footballs, I am the field," out loud to the entire faculty during their morning meeting, asking if anyone knew which troubled student might have written it. This time, a wave of shocked gasps and uneasy murmurs washed over the room. I wasn't just Olivia, the successful architect, the happy bride. I was that pathetic 10th grader again, standing in the principal's office while they tried to figure out if I was a danger to myself, the entire school buzzing with the story of my mortifying mistake. It had taken me years to live that down. Sophie finally paused, a triumphant, self-satisfied smirk on her lips. She raised her glass. "So, here's to Olivia. May she always get the right locker number in life. And to Mark, good luck, buddy. You're going to need it." Silence. A thick, painful, suffocating silence. A few people clapped weakly out of sheer obligation. Sophie's smile faltered for a fraction of a second as she seemed to realize her joke hadn't landed. She had expected roaring laughter, a fun roast. Instead, she had sucked all the joy out of the room, leaving only a crater of second-hand embarrassment where my happiness had been. I sat there, frozen, the bright lights of the reception hall feeling like interrogation's lamps. I could feel 200 pairs of eyes on me, filled with pity. My new mother-in-law looked horrified. My own mother looked like she was about to cry. Then I felt Mark's thumb stroking the back of my hand. I turned to look at him, my eyes swimming with unshed tears. He wasn't looking at Sophie. He was looking at me, his expression a mixture of fury and profound love. He leaned in, his lips brushing my ear. "I love you," he whispered. "We're okay." His words were a lifeline. They pulled me back from the brink of crumbling. I took a shaky breath, straightened my spine, and lifted my head. I looked across the dance floor, past the pitying faces, and found my cousin Daniel standing by his camera rig. He met my gaze, his young face etched with concern. I gave him the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. He nodded back, a silent confirmation passing between us. Then I turned my attention back to the head table. Sophie was walking back to her seat, her movements now a little less confident, a little more uncertain. As she sat down, she looked at me, her face a mask of faux concern. "You okay, Liv? It was just a joke," she whispered. I didn't answer. I simply squeezed Mark's hand, lifted my chin, and met her gaze across the table. I forced my lips into a smile, a wide, bright, chillingly serene smile. And as she watched, I mouthed 2 words to her, ensuring she saw them clearly. "Thank you." The look of confusion that washed over her face was the first satisfying thing I had felt in 10 agonizing minutes. She had no idea what was coming. The betrayal was worse than the humiliation itself. The rest of the reception passed in a blur of forced smiles and strained pleasantries. The joyful atmosphere Sophie had shattered never quite returned. The band played on, people danced, and cake was cut, but a subtle tension hummed beneath it all. I moved through the motions like a well-rehearsed actress, my face a carefully constructed facade of bridal bliss. Inside, I was a hollowed-out cavern of shock and hurt. Everywhere I looked, I saw the lingering effects of her words. Guests would approach to congratulate us, their eyes filled with a pity I didn't want. They'd tell me what a beautiful bride I was, but their tone was the same one used to console someone at a funeral. They were trying to be kind, to smooth over the gaping wound Sophie had torn open in the middle of my perfect day, but it only made it worse. About an hour after the speech, Sophie cornered me near the gift table. She sidled up, linking her arm through mine as if nothing had happened. "Isn't this the best night ever?" she chirped, her voice gratingly cheerful. I gently removed my arm from hers. It was Sophie. Her smile tightened. "Oh, come on, Liv. You're not still mad about that silly speech, are you? I was just trying to be funny, lighten up the room." "You humiliated me, Sophie," I said, my voice low and steady. I refused to cause a scene at my own wedding. I would not give her that satisfaction. In front of everyone I love and respect. "Oh, please," she scoffed, rolling her eyes with practiced dramatic flair. It was a high school story. It's ancient history. People thought it was hilarious. I glanced around the room, at the subdued conversations and the wary looks being cast in our direction. "No, Sophie, they didn't." A flash of anger crossed her face before being replaced by a look of wounded innocence. It was a performance, and a masterful one. At that, she put her hand on her heart, her eyes wide. "Liv, you know I would never, ever intentionally hurt you. You're my sister. I was just teasing. That's what best friends do." The word sister felt like a shard of glass in my ear. A sister wouldn't do that. A best friend wouldn't use my deepest insecurity as a punchline for a room full of strangers. I looked at her, truly looked at the person I had trusted with all my secrets for 20 years, and I saw a stranger. Her face was familiar, but the coldness in her eyes, the hard set of her jaw beneath the trembling lip, that was new. Or perhaps it had always been there, and I had simply refused to see it. "I need to go say hello to Mark's aunt," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone by the mountain of beautifully wrapped gifts. As I circulated, Mark was a constant, solid presence at my side. He didn't mention the speech again, but he didn't have to. His hand was always on the small of my back, a silent, steadying force. He steered me away from conversations that seemed to be veering toward the incident and refilled my champagne glass when he saw my smile start to falter. He was my shield. Later, while Mark was dancing with his mother, I found a moment of quiet on the venue's terrace. The cool night air was a relief against my flushed skin. I leaned against the stone balustrade, looking out at the manicured gardens below. I felt a presence beside me and turned to see my cousin, Daniel. He was a sweet kid, only 23, with an artist's soul and a quiet intensity. I'd hired him as my videographer not just to save money, but because he was genuinely talented. His film school projects were brilliant, and I knew he would capture the day with a sensitivity that a stranger couldn't. "You holding up, Olivia?" he asked softly. I managed a weak smile. "I'm trying." He hesitated for a moment, then leaned closer. "I got it," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "The audio is crystal clear. I isolated her mic feed just like you asked." A wave of something dark and powerful washed over me, eclipsing the hurt for a moment. It was a cold, sharp-edged sense of vindication. "Are you sure?" "Positive," he confirmed. "I checked it on my laptop a few minutes ago. It's all there, every word." I closed my eyes, the memory from last week replaying in my mind with perfect clarity. The bridal party had been getting ready in the hotel suite, a whirlwind of hairspray and nervous energy. I had sent Sophie to my room to grab my earrings. When she took longer than expected, I went to check on her. I'd found her on the phone, her back to the door, her voice a low, venomous hiss. And I had heard the words that had turned my world upside down. The words that had prompted my late night, panicked call to Daniel. Across the terrace, I could see Sophie through the large glass doors. She was laughing with one of the groomsmen, throwing her head back, a picture of carefree fun. She looked like she didn't have a worry in the world. She thought she had gotten away with it. She thought her betrayal was a secret, shrouded in the flimsy excuse of a joke. I looked back at Daniel, my heart hardening into something new, something resolute. The architect in me, the part that designs, plans, and builds with precision, was taking over. The passive, wounded victim was receding, and in her place, a strategist was emerging. Sophie had tried to tear down what I had built. She had tried to humiliate me at the pinnacle of my happiness. But she had made a critical error. She had underestimated me. But they had forgotten one crucial thing, I thought, the phrase echoing in my mind. It wasn't they anymore, it was just her. She had forgotten one crucial thing. She had forgotten who I am. My friendship with Sophie was the stuff of storybooks, or so I had always believed. We met on the first day of second grade when I shared my box of crayons with her after she'd forgotten hers. From that day forward, we were inseparable. Our family homes were only 3 streets apart, and the path between our houses was as well-worn as any ancient Roman road. We built forts in my backyard, choreographed terrible dance routines to pop songs in her basement, and spent countless nights whispering secrets under a canopy of glow-in-the-dark stars stuck to my ceiling. When my appendix burst in middle school, she was the one who brought me my homework every day and read to me until I fell asleep. When her first boyfriend broke her heart, I was the one who held her while she sobbed and helped her burn every picture she had of him in a dramatic backyard bonfire. We were Olivia and Sophie, a single entity, the benchmark against which all our other friendships were measured. As we grew older, our paths began to diverge, but our bond, I thought, remained unbreakable. I went to university for architecture, drawn to the logic, structure, and permanence of it. I loved the idea of creating something lasting and real from nothing but a vision and a set of plans. Sophie, on the other hand, pursued a communications degree with a dream of becoming a star. Her ambitions were more ephemeral, focused on image, influence, and the fleeting adoration of a digital audience. I supported her unconditionally. When she decided to quit her stable marketing job to become a full-time social media influencer, I was her biggest cheerleader. When her follower count plateaued and she grew despondent, I spent hours helping her brainstorm content ideas. When she was short on rent because a brand deal fell through, I quietly transferred money into her account, telling her to pay me back whenever she could. She never did. I never asked. What was a little money between sisters? When Mark proposed, Sophie was the first person I called after my parents. She had shrieked with joy, demanding to see the ring immediately. She threw us a beautiful, if slightly over-the-top, engagement party. On the surface, she was the perfect, supportive best friend. But underneath, tiny, hairline cracks had begun to appear in the foundation of our friendship. I just hadn't wanted to see them. The first strange comment came during dress shopping. I had found a simple, elegant A-line gown that made me feel like myself. Sophie, however, kept pushing for flashier, more dramatic options. "Oh, Liv, that's nice," she'd said, looking at me in the dress I loved. "It's very practical, but don't you want to be a princess on your big day? This one over here has 10,000 hand-sewn crystals." She gestured to a monstrous ball gown that looked like it had eaten a disco ball. When I politely declined, she'd sighed dramatically. "Fine, it's your wedding." Then came her passive-aggressive remarks about the cost. Mark and I, through years of hard work and careful saving, were able to afford the wedding we wanted without going into debt. We weren't extravagant, but we chose things that were important to us, like a beautiful venue and a great photographer. "Wow, a sit-down dinner for 200 people, Sophie had remarked while we were finalizing the menu. "Must be nice to have an engineer's salary to fall back on." The comment was coated in a thin veneer of teasing, but the barb underneath was sharp. My salary was comparable to Mark's, a fact she knew perfectly well. It was a dig designed to make me feel like I was living off my husband's success, erasing my own hard-won achievements. Her behavior around Mark was even more unsettling. She was always overtly familiar with him, touching his arm a little too often, laughing a little too loudly at his jokes. Mark, ever the polite and good-natured man, was oblivious, but I saw it. I saw the way she watched him when she thought no one was looking, a strange, assessing glint in her eyes. It wasn't attraction. It was something more clinical, like she was evaluating an asset. The most glaring red flag came when we were assembling the guest list. She peered over my shoulder, scanning the names. "You're inviting Mark's uncle, the one who's a partner at that huge law firm, and his cousin who works at the investment bank?" she asked, her voice a little too casual. "You should make sure I'm sitting at a good table. You never know who you might meet. Networking is everything, you know." I had laughed it off, but it left a sour taste in my mouth. My wedding wasn't a networking event for her to hustle brand deals. It was the celebration of my love for Mark. Looking back now from the wreckage of my reception, I could see the pattern. It was a tapestry woven with threads of jealousy, resentment, and a desperate, clawing ambition. My success, both professionally as an architect and personally in finding a wonderful man like Mark, wasn't a source of joy for her. It was a mirror reflecting her own perceived failures. Her influencer career wasn't taking off the way she'd planned. She was perpetually single, cycling through relationships that never lasted. My stable, happy, well-designed life was an affront to her chaotic one. The polished, bubbly, best life persona she projected online was a carefully constructed fiction. Beneath it was a woman simmering with an insecurity so profound that she could only feel better about herself by tearing me down. And she had chosen the biggest, most public stage of my life to do it. She hadn't just told an embarrassing story. She had tried to redefine me in front of everyone, to shrink me back down to the awkward, insecure girl she could feel superior to. The realization settled in my bones, cold and heavy as lead. This wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment. This was a calculated act of sabotage from someone I had loved like a sister. And the worst part was, she thought she was smart enough to get away with it. The day after the wedding was supposed to be a blissful bubble of newlywed contentment. We had planned a lazy morning in our hotel suite, ordering row. Service and opening gifts before driving to the coast for a few days. But the bubble had been burst. A heavy silence hung in the air, thick with unspoken words. The pile of beautifully wrapped presents in the corner of the room felt like a monument to a celebration that had been tainted. Mark was a quiet storm of anger on my behalf. He made coffee, his movements clipped and precise. "You don't have to be okay," he said finally, handing me a mug. What she did was unforgivable. "I know," I whispered, tracing the rim of the mug. The hurt from the night before was still a raw, open wound. But overnight, something else had taken root within it, a cold, clear-eyed resolve. The passive sadness was burning away, leaving behind the hard steel of indignation. I had spent the night replaying the moment over and over, and with each replay, my sorrow lessened and my anger grew. "I can't let her get away with it, Mark," I said, my voice stronger now. "She's not just going to sweep this under the rug and pretend it was a joke. She needs to understand that what she did was malicious." He sat beside me on the sofa, taking my hand. "Whatever you want to do, Liv, I'm with you. We can just cut her out of our lives. We never have to speak to her again." "That's not enough," I said, shaking my head. "If we just go silent, she'll spin the story. She'll tell everyone I'm an oversensitive bridezilla who can't take a joke. She'll make herself the victim. I know her. She needs to be exposed." My mind, the architect's mind that saw structures and systems, was already working. I needed a plan. I needed a blueprint for justice. I pulled out my phone and dialed Daniel's number. He answered on the second ring. "I was hoping you'd call," he said. "Are you all right?" "I will be," I replied. "Daniel, I need you to do something for me. Can you send me the audio file? The one from the suite. And also, I need the full video of the speech, captured from all camera angles, and I want you to isolate the audio feed from the head table microphone." "No problem," he said without hesitation. "I'll edit it together and send you a secure link this afternoon. The audio from the suite is damning, Olivia. It's perfectly clear." "I know," I said. "Thank you, Daniel, you're the best." After I hung up, I turned to Mark. "I need to tell you exactly what happened last week." I explained how, on the morning of the wedding, the bridal suite had been a chaotic flurry of activity. I'd sent Sophie back to my connected room to get my pearl earrings from my jewelry box. She was gone for nearly 10 minutes. When I went to see what was taking so long, I found her standing by the window, her back to me, speaking quietly but intensely into her phone. I paused at the doorway, not wanting to interrupt. "No, I don't feel bad about it at all," I heard her say, her voice dripping with a casual bitterness that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "Honestly, someone needs to take her down a peg. Ever since she got with Mark and started planning this ridiculously perfect wedding, she's been insufferable. It's all my brilliant career and my perfect fiancé. It's my duty as her best friend to remind her where she came from." There was a pause. I stood frozen in the doorway, my heart pounding in my ears. What am I going to do? Sophie had laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. "Oh, don't you worry, I have the perfect story for my toast. Something that will knock that perfect little crown right off her head. She'll have to just sit there and smile. What's she going to do, have a meltdown at her own wedding? It's the perfect crime." The words had hit me with the force of a physical blow. I had backed away silently, my mind reeling. The perfect crime. She had planned it. It was premeditated character assassination. My first instinct was to confront her, to throw her out of my wedding. But the pragmatic, strategic part of my brain took over. It would be my word against hers. She would deny everything, cry, and twist it until I looked like the crazy, paranoid one. I needed proof. That's when I had made the late-night call to Daniel. I told him what I'd overheard and asked him, as a personal favor, to be my insurance policy. I told him I needed him to capture everything, especially the speeches, with the highest quality audio possible. I also gave him a tiny, high-fidelity audio recorder, the kind journalists use, and asked him to leave it, accidentally, running on the dresser in the bridal suite for the rest of the pre-wedding preparations. It was a long shot, but I was desperate. I hadn't known for sure if he had captured anything useful. But sitting there at the head table, reeling from her vile speech, the look in Daniel's eye had told me everything I needed to know. The trap had been set, and Sophie had walked right into it. By late afternoon, Daniel's email arrived. The subject line was simply evidence. Inside was a link to a password-protected folder. Mark and I sat together, my laptop on the coffee table, and clicked play. First, we watched the speech. It was even worse the second time. Daniel had masterfully edited it, cutting between a wide shot of the room, a close-up of Sophie's smug face, and a tight shot of me, my expression slowly crumbling. He then cut to the reactions of our parents and guests, their discomfort and shock palpable. It was a brutal, perfectly documented account of my humiliation. Then we played the second file, the audio recording. Sophie's voice filled the quiet hotel room, sharp, clear, and utterly damning. "Someone needs to take her down a peg. It's my duty as her best friend to remind her where she came from. It's the perfect crime." Hearing it again, this time with Mark beside me, solidified my resolve. This was not a friend having a moment of weakness. This was a calculated enemy hiding in plain sight. I closed the laptop. The hurt was still there, a deep, resonant ache, but it was now overlaid with a cold, clear purpose. I was no longer just the victim of her betrayal. I was the architect of her downfall. I had the blueprints. Now, all I had to do was choose the time and place to begin construction. I let a week pass, a full 7 days of radio silence. I didn't answer Sophie's texts, which quickly morphed from feigned concern, "Liv, are you okay? I'm so worried," to frustrated indignation, "Seriously, are you going to ignore me forever over a stupid joke?" I let her calls go to voicemail. I needed her to stew in her own uncertainty. I needed her to wonder what I was thinking. Mark and I went on our mini-moon to the coast. It was a healing balm. The sea air, the long walks on the beach, and Mark's unwavering support helped to wash away some of the bitterness. We talked about Sophie, but we also talked about everything else. Our future, our careers, the silly little details of the life we were building together. By the time we drove home, I felt stronger, clearer, and ready for the first phase of my plan. I sent her a simple text. "Can we meet for coffee tomorrow? We need to talk. The daily grind at 10. Her reply was instantaneous. "Of course, I'm so glad you texted. See you then." I could almost hear the relief in her words. She thought this was it, the moment where I would tearfully accept her non-apology and everything would go back to normal. She had no idea she was walking into a deposition. The next morning, I arrived at the coffee shop 10 minutes early. I chose a small, quiet table in the corner, a location that offered privacy but was still public enough to prevent a major scene. I ordered a black coffee and waited. Sophie bustled in exactly on time, dressed in a trendy athleisure outfit that looked more expensive than my wedding dress. She was all smiles, air-kissing me on both cheeks before sliding into the chair opposite me. "Oh, Liv, I'm so happy we're doing this," she gushed, already reaching for the menu. I have been sick with worry. I hate that there's this weirdness between us. I took a slow sip of my coffee, holding her gaze over the rim of the cup. There's nothing weird about it, Sophie. You intentionally humiliated me at my wedding. I'm hurt and I'm angry. Her smile faltered. The easy, breezy facade dropped, replaced by a defensive pout. Okay, here we go again, she sighed, crossing her arms. I already told you it was a joke. A roast. People do it at weddings all the time. You're being way too sensitive. A roast is meant to be funny, I countered, my voice calm and even. No one was laughing, Sophie. My parents were mortified. Mark's family was horrified. You made everyone in that room deeply uncomfortable. Well, sorry if your new in-laws don't have a sense of humor, she snapped, her voice rising slightly. My friends thought it was funny. Which friends? I asked, genuinely curious. Because I've spoken to a few of our mutual friends, and they were just as appalled as I was. This seemed to throw her. Well, whatever, it's done now. Can't we just move on? Our friendship is more important than one silly speech, isn't it? This was the moment, the turning point. I leaned forward slightly, my hands clasped on the table. I kept my voice low, forcing her to lean in to hear me. The speech isn't the issue, Sophie, I said softly. The issue is that you did it on purpose. The issue is your intent. She reared back as if I'd slapped her. My intent? My intent was to be funny. How can you even say that? I'm your best friend. No, I said, my voice dropping to an almost whisper. You're not. I know what you did, Sophie, and I know why you did it. A flicker of genuine panic crossed her face. Her eyes darted around the coffee shop, as if looking for an escape route. You're being crazy. You're emotional. It was your wedding, I get it. But you're twisting things and making up these insane accusations. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't get angry. I just looked at her with a profound, quiet certainty. I know you did it on purpose to take me down a peg, I said, quoting her own words back to her. The color drained from her face. It was instantaneous and absolute. She looked like a ghost. Her jaw worked, but no sound came out. The smug confidence, the defensive anger, all of it evaporated, replaced by pure, unadulterated fear. Her reaction was more telling than any confession. I don't know what you're talking about, she stammered, her voice a thin, reedy version of its usual confident tone. She fumbled for her purse, her hands shaking. I don't have to sit here and listen to this. You're delusional. Am I asked calmly. I didn't push. I didn't need to. I had revealed my first card, and it had completely shattered her composure. I hadn't told her how I knew. I had simply stated it as an undeniable fact. The ambiguity was eating her alive. How much did I know? Who told me? Was she being watched? Her mind would be racing, filling in the blanks with paranoid scenarios. She stood up abruptly, knocking her chair slightly. I'm leaving, she said, her voice trembling. When you decide to stop being crazy and start acting like a friend again, you have my number. She practically fled from the coffee shop, not even bothering to look back. I remained seated, taking another slow sip of my now lukewarm coffee. I hadn't yelled, I hadn't cried. I had simply presented a single, unadorned truth and watched it dismantle her. Phase 1 was complete. I had confirmed her guilt not with an accusation, but with her own panicked reaction. And I had planted a seed of terror that I knew would now begin to sprout. She had no idea what other evidence I held. Her perfect crime was unraveling, and she was the one pulling the threads. Sophie's panic quickly curdled into aggression. Realizing that a direct defense was impossible, she did exactly what I predicted she would. She went on the offensive. She launched a preemptive smear campaign, positioning herself as the poor, misunderstood victim of a hypersensitive, ungrateful bridezilla. The first volley came 2 days after our coffee shop confrontation. A text from a mutual friend, Amy. Hey, just spoke to Sophie. She's really torn up. Said you guys had a huge fight and you accused her of trying to ruin your wedding. Is everything okay? I responded calmly. Everything is fine on my end. It's a complicated situation. Let's catch up soon. But the texts kept coming. from other friends, from members of the bridal party. Each one was a slight variation on the same theme. Sophie was spinning a masterful narrative. She told them I'd had a total meltdown over a light-hearted roast. She claimed the stress of the wedding had changed me. She whispered that my new husband, Mark, was controlling and was trying to isolate me from my old friends. Each text was a small pinprick, but together they created a growing sense of siege. Sophie wasn't just trying to save face, she was trying to rewrite history and poison the well of my oldest friendships. The stakes were no longer just about my personal feelings of betrayal. This was now a battle for the truth and for the relationships I had cherished for years. A private resolution was no longer an option. She had made it public. I would have to end it publicly. The final piece of my own plan clicked into place when I received an email from another one of our friends, Chloe. It was a brightly colored evite. "You're invited," it read in a swirling, celebratory font. "Join us for a post-wedding brunch to celebrate our favorite maid of honor, Sophie, and toast her incredible friendship with Olivia. Let's get together and share our favorite memories from the big day." The brunch was scheduled for the following Sunday at a trendy, glass-walled restaurant downtown that was a known haunt for local influencers and the see-and-be-seen crowd. It was being hosted by Sophie herself. She was throwing her own victory party. She was building a stage, intending to stand in the spotlight and cement her version of events, surrounded by friends she had successfully swayed to her side. It was audacious, it was arrogant, and it was the most perfect opportunity she could have possibly handed me. "This is it," I said to Mark, showing him the invitation on my phone. "This is the venue." Mark read it, his jaw tightening. "She's unbelievable. Are you sure you want to walk into that? It's going to be an ambush." "It's not an ambush if you're the one holding all the weapons," I replied, a grim smile on my face. "She's gathering all the key witnesses in one room for me. She thinks she's the director, but she doesn't know I've already rewritten the final scene." My case wasn't a legal one, but I prepared it like one. I asked Daniel to create a short, 1-minute video file. It started with a 30-second clip from Sophie's speech, focusing on the most cringeworthy lines and the horrified reactions of the guests. Then, without any transition, it cut directly to the crystal-clear audio he had captured in the hotel's suite, with her damning words, "Take her down a peg." The perfect crime laid over a simple black screen with white text transcribing them. It was irrefutable. The next few days were tense. A part of me, the part that still remembered the little girl who shared her crayons with me, felt a pang of sadness. I was about to detonate a bomb in the middle of a 20-year friendship, but then I would remember the cold, calculating look in Sophie's eyes during that speech, and the resolve would harden in my gut like concrete. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. It was about reclaiming the narrative that she had tried to steal from me. On the morning of the brunch, I chose my outfit with the care of a general selecting her armor. A simple, navy blue sheath dress. Professional, elegant, and serious. I wasn't the hysterical bridezilla she had painted me as. I was a calm, rational adult who had been pushed too far. Mark held my hand as we walked towards the restaurant. "Ready?" he asked. "Ready," I said, taking a deep breath. I had the video file on my phone and a small but powerful portable Bluetooth speaker in my purse. "Let's go see the show." The restaurant was bright and airy, filled with the cheerful clatter of cutlery and conversation. A long table had been set up near the back, and about 15 of our mutual friends were already there. At the head of the table, holding court like a queen, was Sophie. She was dressed in a vibrant floral dress, a radiant smile plastered on her face as she recounted some anecdote. The moment Mark and I appeared in the entryway, a hush fell over the table. The laughter died. Sophie's smile froze, a flicker of apprehension in her eyes before she quickly composed herself. She had invited me, of course, but she clearly hadn't expected me to actually show up. My presence was a disruption to her carefully orchestrated performance. "Olivia, Mark, you came," she exclaimed, her voice a little too loud, a little too bright. She stood and came toward us, arms open for a hug. I didn't flinch, but I didn't return the embrace either. I simply stood there until she awkwardly dropped her arms. "We wouldn't miss it," I said calmly, my eyes sweeping over the faces at the table. I saw confusion, curiosity, and in a few cases, a clear coolness. Amy, who had texted me with concern, wouldn't meet my gaze. We took our seats at the opposite end of the table. The conversation slowly, awkwardly, started up again, but the energy had shifted. My presence and my quiet composure was an unanswered question hanging in the air. Sophie, however, was a performer. She doubled her efforts, her voice growing louder, her gestures more animated. She was trying to seize back control of the room. After the food was served, she stood, tapping her water glass with a spoon. "I just want to thank you all so much for coming," she began, beaming at the faces of our friends. "It means so much to me to have friends who support each other, through thick and thin. My friendship with Olivia is the most important thing in the world to me, and I know that even when things get stressful, like they can around a big wedding, we'll always find our way back to each other. I just love her so much." She raised her glass, and the others, caught up in her performance, raised theirs. This was my moment. "That's a beautiful sentiment, Sophie," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the air. It wasn't loud, but it had a clear, commanding tone that made everyone stop and look at me. "But before we toast to a friendship you've been working so hard to sabotage, I think there's something everyone here deserves to hear." Sophie's smile faltered. "Olivia, what are you doing? Don't make a scene." "I'm not the one who made a scene, Sophie. You did. At my wedding," I said, my gaze unwavering. I reached into my purse and took out my phone and the small speaker, placing them on the table. A confused murmur went through the group. "You've all heard Sophie's version of events," I said, addressing the table. "You've heard that I'm oversensitive, that I'm a bridezilla, that I can't take a joke. Now, I'd like you to hear the truth, in Sophie's own words." With shaking but steady hands, I tapped the screen of my phone. The speaker crackled to life. First came the audio from the wedding speech. Sophie's voice filled the restaurant, smug and self-satisfied, telling the story of Mr. Henderson and the poetry book. I watched as our friends winced, reliving the awkwardness. Then the video cut to black. A new audio track began. It was the recording from the hotel room, crystal clear and damning. Sophie's voice, but a different version of it. A cold, bitter, venomous whisper. Someone needs to take her down a peg. Ever since she got with Mark and started planning this ridiculously perfect wedding, she's been in suff. Irable, it's my duty as her best friend to remind her where she came from. A collective gasp went through the table. Eyes widened in shock. People looked from the speaker to Sophie, their expressions morphing from confusion to dawning horror. The recording continued. "I have the perfect story for my toast. Something that will knock that perfect little crown right off her head. She'll have to just sit there and smile. It's the perfect crime." When the audio ended, a profound, tomb-like silence descended upon the table. No one moved. No one spoke. All eyes were fixed on Sophie. Her face was a canvas of utter devastation. The color had drained away, leaving a pasty, grayish pallor. Her mouth was slightly open, her eyes wide with the terror of a creature caught in a trap it never saw. The confident, radiant influencer was gone, replaced by a shrunken, exposed fraud. The silence was finally broken by Chloe, the friend who had sent the Evite. She stared at Sophie, her face a mask of disbelief and disgust. "Sophie, how could you?" she whispered, the words trembling with emotion. "I defended you, I believed you." Sophie looked around the table, desperately searching for an ally, for a single face that held a trace of sympathy. She found none. All she saw was a jury of her peers, their faces reflecting her own ugliness back at her. She turned to me, her eyes pleading. "Olivia, I." But she had no words. There were no more lies to tell, no more performances to give. The stage she had built for her triumph had become the setting of her public execution. She pushed her chair back, grabbed her purse, and fled the restaurant, leaving behind a table of shattered friendships and the echoing silence of her own treachery. In the aftermath of the brunch, Sophie's social world collapsed with breathtaking speed. The audio file, which I had only ever intended to show that small group, took on a life of its own. Friends shared it with other friends, horrified by the cold, calculated nature of her betrayal. The story spread like wildfire through our interconnected social circles. The friends who had been on the fence, or who had bought into her victim narrative, reached out to me with profuse, embarrassed apologies. Amy called me in tears, saying she was ashamed she had ever doubted me. Chloe sent a gift basket with a long, handwritten letter expressing her regret. I was gracious and accepted their apologies. They had been manipulated by a master, and I understood that. Our friendships, the real ones, were bruised but ultimately salvageable. Sophie's downfall, however, was absolute. Her brand, which was built on a flimsy foundation of authenticity and positive vibes, crumbled overnight. Her follower count, which she monitored with religious obsession, began to plummet as the story made the rounds. The comments on her posts turned from fawning praise to outright scorn. She had tried to humiliate me to build herself up, but instead, she had only exposed her own toxic core to the world. A local gossip blog even picked up the story, anonymized, of course, but the details were specific enough that everyone in our community knew exactly who it was about. The maid of honor from hell became a cautionary tale. She tried to fight back, posting a tearful, rambling video about being bullied and taken out of context, but it was no use. The evidence was too clear, her own words too damning. Within a month, she had deactivated all of her social media accounts and, I heard through the grapevine, had moved back in with her parents in another state. She had become a social pariah in the city she had tried so desperately to conquer. I felt a strange sense of detachment from her ruin. It wasn't the gleeful satisfaction of revenge I had expected, but a quiet, somber sense of justice. It was the logical, structural conclusion to the blueprint of her own making. She had laid the foundation of deceit, and her world had collapsed under its weight. A few months later, Mark and I finally took our real honeymoon, a 2-week trip to Italy that we had postponed. On our last night, we sat on the balcony of our hotel in Florence, overlooking the Arno River, a bottle of Chianti between us. The nightmare of the wedding felt a million miles away. I took out my phone and navigated to the folder labeled evidence. I looked at the video file for a long moment, the little icon that held so much pain and power. Then, without ceremony, I pressed delete. A pop-up asked me if I was sure. I was. "It's gone," I said to Mark, setting my phone down on the table. He smiled, reaching across to take my hand. "Good, you don't need it anymore." He was right, I didn't. The anger had faded, leaving behind a clean, quiet peace. I hadn't just exposed a toxic friend, I had defended myself. I had protected my happiness and my marriage from a malicious attack. I had stood up, not as a victim, but as a woman in control of her own story. The betrayal had left a scar, a permanent reminder of how a 20-year friendship could curdle into something unrecognizable. But it was a scar, not an open wound. It was a part of my story, but it no longer defined it. I leaned my head on my husband's shoulder, watching the last rays of the Tuscan sun paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. I was surrounded by a love that was real and a future that I had designed myself, strong, stable, and built to last. And it was more beautiful than any I could have ever imagined.